Good evening, everybody, and thank you for attending the Broadway Bikeway Design Workgroup for the final design phase. It is great to see so many familiar names and faces popping into the meeting here. Welcome back. And it's great to see a bunch of new names and new organizations who are joining us tonight. We anticipate to have a very full virtual house, and we also have a very full agenda. So we're going to jump right into it tonight and keep moving while folks continue to join us. So with that, I'm gonna flip it to our meeting facilitator, Sam Haas.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see so many faces. So I know it has been quite a while since we have met, and a lot has been happening in the meantime. So just to talk through a little bit of the key outcomes for tonight, the first one is to really provide some process and schedule updates related to the final design. And then we'll also cover any relevant next steps and project implementation processes. We're going to move through the presentation pretty quickly tonight, just because we'll be splitting off into small groups. So those small groups will actually be zooming in on specific segments of the corridor. So we're going to want to allow as much time as possible for those groups to be able to chat. So just I'm going to walk through the plan for tonight. So in a minute, I will call on the design group members to introduce themselves. We'll sort of do a round robin introduction there, which is always fun on Zoom. And then we will provide a summary update of where we're at with the design process and timeline. We'll share a comparison of the input that has been received by the community and how that input has been received and integrated into the design. Then we'll spend the majority of our time in breakouts, as I said, where the plan is to provide some more zoomed in information, sharing sort of specific design elements for different segments of the corridor. For the breakouts, we'll split the group into 3 groups, and those groups will then rotate 3 times, spending about 15 minutes discussing each defined segment. Then we'll come back to the big group, do any report outs about big picture takeaways from those. And we'll cover some next steps about the timeline and implementation planning, and cover any public comments or questions that come up, and then adjourn. So that's the plan for tonight. These meeting guidelines are really just a touch point for all of our discussions. So they're more of a reminder, since I know you all have been meeting for some time here. The first is really to just demonstrate courtesy and respect. So means being responsible for your own mute button. We've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to move through the presentation, as I said, pretty quickly. So if you will all keep yourselves on mute to minimize background noise, that'd be great. But if you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand via Zoom, or you can type your question into the chat. I'll periodically ask to see if we have any questions via chat, and manage those. And the second is to just be collaborative, which is a reminder that we all share the same broad interests. Try to do my best to listen to understand and not to respond. And then just sort of the simple request that we refrain from interrupting each other. And then finally is just to help us stay on agenda. So obviously we have facilitators for tonight, but we've got a lot to get through. So if we could just be mindful of the time that we're taking up and help the group stay focused. In terms of council members, I'd like to recognize any council members in attendance. So I just looking through the attendance list. Do we have any council members in attendance?
Just to jump in real quick, my name is Ben Chavez from City Council District 3. I'm one of Councilwoman Torres's aides, and I'm filling in for Councilwoman Torres.
Welcome, thank you.
I'm Liz Zukowski. I'm like Ben, an aide to Councilman Chris Hines of District 10, and I am sitting in for him during this meeting.
Wonderful, welcome, thank you so much. Any other council members? Okay, well, hopefully if any others join, we can get them up to speed. So then I also want to recognize members of the public. So welcome. If this is your first meeting, this is a design work group meeting. So design work group members were selected to really represent the broad range of interests around the corridor. So if you have any questions, or if anything comes up throughout the meeting, we will try and designate some time at the end of meetings, or time permitting, to answer questions or comments from members of the public. So Miles, I'm going to flip it to you to introduce the project team and design, and then we'll do a design work group introduction round robin.
Excellent. Thanks, Sam. And because we don't have a lot of time tonight, we're going to move through it really quickly. But it's been a while since we've been with this work group and we've got some new members of the team. So let's really quick run through and introduce ourselves. I'm Miles Graham. I'm fortunate enough to know many of you from previous meetings working on the community engagement side. I want to introduce our new project manager, James Colbert.
Hello, my name is James Colbert. I'm with the Denver Department of Transportation Infrastructure Transportation Build Division. So I am the project manager for the remainder of the design and through construction.
Thanks, James. And Gabby, I know we only have you for a little while. Can you introduce yourself? I think Gabby's actually pulling double duty on another meeting. So let's go to Mike Harmer with Matt Zerkowski on deck.
Good evening, everybody. This is Mike Harmer. I'm with Dottie Transportation Projects Management. I'm the project manager for the Broadway and I-25 project.
Thanks, Mike. And Matt with Brendan Kelly on deck.
Yeah, Matt Zerkowski with Kinley Horn and Associates, one of the project engineers working from our team on the project. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. And Brendan with Kaylee on deck.
Yes, Brendan Kelly with Dottie, and I'm involved with special districts. There are 3 local maintenance districts in this area, and I'm on the board for all 3.
Thanks, Brendan. Kaylee with Heidi on deck.
Hi, Kaylee Showers with GBSM working on community engagement for the project.
Thanks, Kaylee. Heidi with Bryce on deck.
Hi, Heidi Otten. I'm with Kinley Horn and Associates, and I'm one of the project engineers.
Thanks, Heidi. Bryce with Brian Wethington on deck.
Hey everyone, Bryce Hamilton here. I am on Dottie Transportation Design and filling in for Brett Boncory for this meeting.
Thanks, Bryce. And Brian with Brian Valentine on deck. Brian Wethington, I think you're on mute. Looks like maybe Brian Wethington has a little audio challenge.
Is that better?
Much better.
Okay, there you go. I'll try that again. My name is Brian Wellington. I'm with the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, Office of Green Infrastructure. Kind of a mouthful. I'm a landscape architect.
Thanks, Brian. And Brian Valentine.
Hey, good evening. Brian Valentine with Kinley Horn and Associates, the project manager for the consultant team, and really glad to be here.
Thanks, project team. And last call, did I accidentally miss any project team members? Whew, that's really sad. Back to you.
Awesome. So we're going to move through design work group members pretty quickly. And I'm just going to start from the top of my list and move through them if that format works. So I'm going to call on Amanda Roberts with Andrew on deck.
Hi. Do you want me to say something? Amanda Roberts.
No, oh, I'm sorry. So we're just going to give our name, our organization, just pretty quick.
Lincoln Broadway Quarter Registered Neighborhood Organization. There you go. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. All right, Andrew.
Hey, my name is Andrew Iltis. I am with the Downtown Denver Partnership representing the Downtown Denver bid and the TMA downtown.
Awesome, thank you. I'm going to call on Andrew with Brian Carroll on deck. Benjamin with Brian Carroll on deck. Benjamin Chavez, are you, there you go.
You just wanted me to reintroduce myself?
Oh yeah, you had already introduced yourself. I apologize. Thank you. Brian Carroll, if you want to introduce yourself with Charlie Bush on deck.
Hello all, Brian Carroll, the Mayor's Bicycle Advisory Committee, or MBAC. Good to be here, thanks.
Awesome, thank you. Chris Miller with Jamie on deck.
Chris Miller with West Wash Park Neighborhood Association Zoning Committee and Beautiful Spear Neighborhood Association.
Jamie with Jessica Vargas on deck. Jamie, are you there? Okay, we're gonna jump and we can come back to you if you figure out your mute. But Jessica Vargas, do you want to introduce yourself with Catherine Smith on deck?
Hi, I'm Jessica Vargas. I'm the program manager for the Denver Streets Partnership.
Awesome. Catherine Smith with Liz Zukowski on deck.
Catherine Smith with West Washington Park.
Liz, I think you already introduced yourself, but
yeah, Council District 10. Thanks.
Liz. And let me back to my list. Jessica, let's see. This is always fun. Lucia with Marika on deck.
Hi, I'm Lucia Brown, and I'm the president of the Baker Historic Neighborhood Association, and I'm here as an observer. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mayika with Rick on deck.
Hi, I'm Marika, and myself and I are from also Baker Neighborhood.
Rick with Shonda on deck. Rick, are you there? There you go.
I am. Hi, I'm Rick Carpenter with the Broadway Pedestrian Mall.
Awesome. And Shonda with Steve on deck.
I'm Shonda Maher. I live in West Wash Park and I'm an observer.
Thank you, Shonda. Steve with William Feinberg on deck.
Steve Harley with Baker Historic Neighborhood Association.
William, you want to go last?
Sure. I'm William Feinberg, a property owner and also a member of the Broadway Maintenance District.
Awesome. Whew, those are always, thank you, everyone. Did I miss anybody? Charlie Bush, did I miss you?
It's okay. You're going really fast. Charlie
I'm
Bush.
sorry.
No worries. West Wash Park Neighborhood Association. Thanks. Bye.
Anybody else that I missed? Okay. Phew, well, it's good to have everybody's names too to their faces. Okay, so for the project update, we're just going to provide an overview of how we got here. So the goals, the priorities, the benefits for the project, and then do a refresh on the timeline as well up to this point and into implementation. So Miles, can I flip it to you to sort of talk through the Mayor's Mobility Action Plan here?
Thanks, Sam, and a nice job on the introductions. I feel like what used to be the fun way to get the meeting started now is the hardest part when you're trying to facilitate that. So great to have everybody with us again tonight. And for those of you who have been with us before, you've seen this slide. It's the Mobility Action Plan. We like to start with the overarching kind of mobility vision for the city to create a better and more connected and balanced transportation network that emphasizes safety for people in all modes. And you'll see that as we zoom into the project specific goals, they're aligned with that and emphasizing the need to have everyone arrive safely at their destinations, have community and business collaboration, and look for new and enhanced mobility options for all. So really looking at the project benefits along the entire corridor, creating connectivity to where people want to go and the great destinations along Broadway, and also connecting into the Cherry Creek Trail so that people can use the Broadway Bikeway, get on and off as part of the transportation network for people on bikes in Denver, and doing it in a way that collaborates with the community and with the businesses. And as you know, we've been having outreach on this corridor for quite some time, and it actually makes me a little sentimental to think of our last meeting when we were all together in person. It was late 2019 at Voodoo Donut, where we had the final Friday Donuts and Design event. And we got a lot of great feedback on the 60% design at that meeting. That was about halfway there. You'll see kind of what that input was and how it shaped the final design tonight. So we're looking forward to getting back on the corridor and having more donuts together at some point in the future as we get this final design into construction. You see the list here. We've had a lot of different avenues for folks to be engaged. Aside from design work group meetings, there's been community outreach. We've had presentations with many of your neighborhood associations. We've done a tremendous amount of public surveying. You've had great responses. We've gotten, I think, over 1,500 surveys taken in the last 18 months. And Bike to Work Day kind of go into where a lot of the folks are at Denver Health, and certainly the old school email and digital communications as well. For those of you who are familiar with the project, you know that we've actually been studying this corridor. The city's been looking at it since 2015. So a lot of community communication and conversations in that time. And I think that's a good segue to schedule. And James, project manager.
Sure. Thanks, Miles. As Miles mentioned, we've been looking at this corridor for quite some time, and the early 2015 efforts included the test bikeway that's currently along Broadway. We collected data and reported upon that, and that information led to the development of the north and south bike lane segments. The north bike lane segment, which is Spear to Civic Center Station along Broadway, is currently in concept design. It's currently kind of on pause, waiting for final funding to complete the design and eventually for implementation. So the south segment, which is our project here, the South Broadway Multimodal Project, is essentially from Spear down south to Center Avenue. And as they mentioned before, you haven't heard from us for a while, but even though you haven't heard from us, we have been working. We have been moving the project forward. We encountered a few delays along the way. Most notably, in 2018, there was a change in Colorado state legislation. It particularly changed the requirements for construction projects, information and data that needs to be collected associated with those, primarily associated with subsurface utilities. So the utilities that are underneath the ground. So water, gas, electric. We have to do some additional due diligence to locate those and resolve any potential conflicts ahead of construction. So that change in legislation was not part of, obviously it wasn't anticipated or part of Kimley Horn's original design scope. So we had to go through the process of amending their contract and getting this project in compliance with the current regulations. And so that certainly slowed us down. And about the time we were finishing up amending their contract, COVID happened. That certainly didn't help our situation any. It certainly complicated data collection and other efforts along the corridor, but we're continuing to move forward. Kimley Horn is anticipating wrapping up final design plans around late summertime this year. And then moving forward, after design plans are done, we'll move into kind of the right-of-way acquisition phase of the project. Not to scare anyone there. The right-of-way acquisition for this project is currently slated for only temporary construction easements. And those are associated with little portions of land where we need to make better tie-ins with the sidewalks and ADA ramps, where just, some of the right-of-way is kind of, old and, complicated. Want to make sure that we had good connectivity throughout the corridor. And so that's what all those easements would be associated with. They're all just temporary. Following the procurement of our temporary construction easements, we anticipate moving into procuring construction late this year, and then anticipate implementation and starting construction in 2022.
Awesome. So moving on to sort of the design process, I'm going to hand it off to Matt from Kimley Horn here in a second, and he's going to talk us through how we moved through the different phases of the design process, from conceptual at 30% to detailed design at 60% to where we now are at the final stage at 90%. So Matt, I'm going to kick it to you. Talk a little bit about how we got here.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. And that's a really great to get to build off of where James has given us a background of where we've been, and I'll kind of help fill the gaps and refresh everybody's memory. So looking back, whenever we started our 30% design, we're really just getting an understanding of the corridor. Really what we were looking to do at that time was just to determine how much space we had and define the different distinct corridor segments and really figure out how we can improve each of those. Our goal during this phase of the project was to determine how we could best provide a safe and functional corridor for all users. As we began to progress from that conceptual 30% design towards our 60% design, the improvements on the corridor really began to take shape as we determined the specific placement and development of key project elements. So at our project intersection, that includes our more detailed designs of things like ADA curb ramps, determining where our traffic signal equipment may go, beacons. Along the corridor itself, we are starting to get a little bit further into the details during the 60% stage on what the buffer type looks like. And so we talked through a couple options and coordinated with the public for their input on those and started to figure out what that buffer is and how is it actually work and applied in our construction drawings and ultimately in construction. As far as curb lane use, we continued our coordination with the city to really kind of determine where the loading zones would be along the corridor, figuring out some details related to parking and other things that interact in the curb space. And then lastly, the drainage and stormwater component. We're making a lot of improvements, particularly paving improvements at the intersection, and we need to determine what the impacts were to the existing stormwater and drainage infrastructure and start to plan to update those as needed. As we developed the detail for all these items, we really started to identify any areas where we had potential conflicts with utilities, kind of like Jane was referencing with regards to Sue. So as we're progressing from our 60 to our 90% design, we're really starting to get down into the details and figure out what's actually necessary to get the project and the plans to a point where they are shovel construction ready. So along the corridor, it's again just getting further into the details on all those things we talked about with our buffer, our signage specifically, and everything else that supports the changes in the curb zone. At the intersection, it's really defining the grading improvements even further so that every curb ramp is ADA accessible. The sidewalks there are ADA accessible. If there's a business on the corner, that we're having an ADA entrance that is accommodated. So it really just narrowing down into the details. The drainage analysis was done again and advanced so that any of the paving improvements that may require the relocation of a storm inlet or the modification of one are taken into consideration, and then we can redesign the storm drain improvements. And again, everything comes back to utility conflicts. That's an overarching theme that came throughout there. So right now we're at our 90% design, like James alluded to, and we are looking to get comments back from the city and advance the final details that we really need to do to get the project shovel ready to go to bid and ultimately out to construction.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. So I think now's a good time if we have any questions around what we've covered so far. We're just going to dive into community input next and how we heard it and how it was applied. So if anybody has any questions that have come up from the previous slides, we're going to dedicate just a couple minutes, recognizing that we're also going to zoom into specific sections during the breakouts. Steve.
I thought the slide said construction 2022, but I might not have caught it, but it almost sounded like James said construction might start in 2021. So if I misheard, then I apologize. Otherwise, I'd like to choose one.
Sure. Construction procurement, I guess. Maybe I might, if I misspoke, I apologize. So, you know, getting all the documents, putting it out for bid, getting the contractor on board, getting council approval, all that stuff. It takes a little bit of time. So yeah, construction will be in 2022.
Thank you. Lucia?
Hi. Yeah, so I have spent a week moving people forward virtual conference. I don't know if anybody on this team has attended that. And some of the things they talked about was basically mobility for everyone. And I'm wondering, since this was initially conceived of several years ago, if there have been any other changes based on what we've learned in the past 5 years plus from what other cities have done with their bike lanes. For example, making sure differently abled people can easily navigate the bike lane either from the sidewalk or from a vehicle, like bollards aren't blocking, or if a person is, doesn't have sight, how they navigate, and if those things have been then taken into consideration.
Lucia, I'll jump in here. That's a great question. And I think James and Brian, some of our designers, will have more insight to it. But you'll see kind of as we're running through what we heard and how it was applied, there's some ADA elements that are incorporated into the design. And during our breakouts, what we'll want to do is for specific areas, we can zoom into some of those so you can see how it's been incorporated. But James or Brian, do you want to tell us a little bit about best practices and lessons learned from other cities and how we incorporated them here?
Yeah, and actually I could jump in there real quick, Miles. So, and best practices was a great way to say that, actually. So what we've done throughout the course of the design is take in a lot of the lessons learned or best management practices that we've learned from other implementations of enhanced bikeways throughout Denver and our friends across the country as well. So certain things that we have changed from the initial design till now, and we talked about a few of these at a few of our breakout sessions for the 60% design, but the centerline hardening, those were not initially as part of the design, but those are safety features that it brought into the project throughout. Additionally, some of the safety sight triangles, those have been modified from when the project was initially conceived through now. So really a big focus on safety. We've had some, like I mentioned, a lot of some practices that we've taken that we've applied throughout this design, and I feel pretty confident that we're at a spot right now where we're sitting pretty good as we're moving forward here. So.
And Brian, tell me a little bit. I think when we were looking at some of the designs for folks who may be using a wheelchair or other ADA compliant things for accessing the bikeway and crossing the bikeway, there is a pedestrian refuge and design elements that will make crossing distances shorter and make it easier for differently abled people to navigate the bikeway. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, Miles. So at a lot of the signalized intersections, we're putting in brand new curb ramps at each one of those, but then at a majority of the intersections, we are doing the ped refuge islands. So at that point, essentially, we're shortening the crossing distance of Broadway, which provides a safer pedestrian experience throughout the corridor.
Excellent. And Lucia, hopefully that answered your question. And like I said, for the breakout groups, we'll be able to zoom into those specific areas so you can see kind of what the design looks like in sort of how it will be applied in the real world construction.
Awesome. Okay, without seeing any other hands, I think we can move on to the community input section. And if you do have questions that come up, as we mentioned, there's definitely time during the breakouts to do that. So community input has been absolutely critical to defining the details of the final design. And I just wanted to give sort of a high level warm up to show the key ways in which the input has really been translated and integrated into the final design, since we'll be diving more into the detail and specifics during the breakouts. So first of all, the buffer type. So the community identified that the preferred type is a concrete curb with planters as the close second. So the way that was applied was that the final design uses concrete curb as the buffer type. When the community discussed priority mobility benefits, they identified a parking protected bikeway as the most important mobility benefit. And the way that was applied was that the detailed design includes concrete curb and parking protected bikeway. The community talked through different options for the Cherry Creek Trail connection and identified option A, which is the plaza connection, as their preference. And the final design used option, 1A was their preference, and they used 1A in the final design. In terms of visibility and safety, that was identified as the #1 priority related to curb lane use and on-street parking. How it was applied was that there is expanded intersection visibility, so sight triangle improvements at intersections, and those are located and designed with conspicuity and visibility of vulnerable users in mind. Flashing beacons are proposed at non-signalized intersections to bring awareness to motorists or other users along the corridor. Upgraded traffic signals with bike phases, indications, and improvements are included to separate bicycles and vehicles and remove conflicts. And then hardened center lines and raised pedestrian refuges improve safety for all users by defining the space, reducing crossing widths, and slowing turning movements. And so this next slide is just, it's a visual of what the raised pedestrian refuge looks like, just a mock-up of what it will look like. Yes. And the community identified ADA accessible parking as the second priority related to curb lane use. And in the final design, all intersections include full accessible pedestrian ramps, and no designated accessible parking currently exists on the east side of Broadway. And opportunities for additional accessible locations on side streets are being identified with the help of the community moving forward. The community's second top priority for mobility benefits was to install new traffic, bike, and pedestrian signals. And in the final design, there are 13 upgraded traffic, bike, and pedestrian signals that will be installed as part of the project. Bikeway connections and crossing points and local access were the number 1 and 2, respectively, most important priorities for the community for additional study. So opportunities for Broadway station and east and west connectivity are being explored, and all signalized intersections will have a protected left turn, bike, and pedestrian signal phases. So we're just talk through a little bit of how the community input and amenities were received into the final design. So the results from the community survey that was distributed during the detailed design phase has really driven a lot of the development of the final design. So soon we're gonna split into breakout groups to learn more about the specific design elements for different segments of the corridor, but just wanted to take a second to frame up some of the priorities from the community that were critical to the work that's been done to sort of flesh out those designs and details. So for new amenities, the community's number 1 priority was to install new bike and scooter parking along Broadway. Their second priority was to install planters. They also prioritized trash and recycling facilities as well as public art. When asked, half of the respondents supported the proposed commercial and ride-hailing loading zone locations, and a third of the people were just kind of neutral on that. Broadly speaking, accessibility and safety were key values and that continued to be priorities across all the design elements, specifically when it comes to the use of a curb lane, on-street parking, and bike facilities. So just to talk a little bit about the public art piece, a artist has been selected after an RFP generated 182 artist proposals. Jamie Paulus was selected. They are an artist from Indianapolis. The goal of the art is really to enhance the corridor and help with placemaking. In terms of the timeline, the plans will be finished by the fall. So at that point, the city can determine the specifics for the public art, including the location and all that good stuff. Locations are TBD, but expect for there to be about 5 to 8 pieces throughout the corridor. The city's public arts team, the artist, and then Dottie will all work together to determine the locations and make sure that they're placed in a manner that makes sense for the corridor. They're going to be visible and really enhance the public space. Obviously, it's difficult to maybe do public art at the same time as construction is happening, so specific designs are still TBD as well. But this slide gives sort of a conceptual idea or artist rendering of what that might look like. Okay, so we're going to break out into.
Looks like we have a question, Sam.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Marika, do you have a question at this point?
Yeah, I'm just curious. I fell off some of these planning meetings a little bit in the middle, so I'm kind of joining you back up. Was there any community input on what artist was chosen and the conceptual artwork? Because I definitely didn't see this. Did anyone else? And I just want to know what kind of participation there was.
Mm-hmm.
Marika, that's a great question. And I think, Brendan, if you're still with us, or maybe James, someone from the project team, can provide a little insight into what that RFP process and the artist selection protocols were.
Yeah, I joined the process towards the end. So there was a pretty large community, pretty large committee of members that reviewed all the different proposals. Brian, do you remember if it included anyone from the public?
Yeah, it did. So it was a pretty large group selection panel that went through the process, and there was a voting process associated with it. So there were folks from the city, from Dottie, the project team, local artists. I forget how many local artists there were, but I think there were 3 or 4 local artists with it throughout the community that took part. So I think there were probably and somebody just said they were on the steering committee as well in the chat there. So if I remember right, I think there were about 10 to 12 people that were part of the selection panel.
And how many people live in the neighborhood were involved? Do you know if they lived in the neighborhood or were just at large public?
I don't know the answer on that one, so we could follow back up.
Yeah, the members of the selection panel were determined by the Denver Arts District. They solicited the RFP and set up the panel. And really, so this project team didn't, aside from participating in, listening in on the meetings and getting to see the presentations, didn't have an influence on the selection of the artist.
Marika, that's a great question. Thank you for that. And it sounds like we can do a little more digging, but I know from some of the chats we see and some of the story that Brian gave, it was a pretty diverse panel. It sounds like some of the local maintenance districts were involved, but we can get back to you with some more details on what the composition was of that.
Excellent, because I can think of a lot of people who would have maybe some opinions on this.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for flagging that.
Awesome. So we're going to break out into breakout discussions now. And as I mentioned, we're going to break into 3 small groups just based off of segments along the corridor. And they'll each have a designated facilitator and note taker, as well as a project team member. That facilitator report out on the key themes from the discussion. And you'll spend about 15 minutes in each breakout group. So everyone will learn about each segment. So we're not, putting you in one group. You'll move through all of them. And then since we're at the final design phase, the key goal for these breakout groups is to really do some information sharing specific to each segment and provide you all with an opportunity to zoom in on the specific spots or design elements that you're interested in. We've been calling it kind of like a speed dating opportunity because it might not be as much time as you're used to spending in breakout groups, but it's because our desired outcomes from this meeting are really to make sure that you all have the information that you need to get any critical questions answered. So breakout group A is Bryce, Matt, and myself. Breakout group B, James, Heidi, Miles, and Brian Wethington. And group C is Mike, Brian, and Kaylee. So Sarah, I'm going to call upon you to work your Zoom magic and get us in our breakouts.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the group. We had a lot of good discussion. I know in breakout group B, we got cut off a little bit. So as we do a report out, we can kind of pull on some of those threads a little bit more. But Sam, I'll turn it over to you.
Same thing happened in breakout group A, so we'll probably have to do the same thing. So just real quickly, I'm going to summarize sort of the key questions and themes that arose during breakout group A. So do you mind sharing your screen, Miles?
Yeah, can you see?
Yeah, that's awesome. So some questions that we had around the sidewalk at the corner of Spear and Broadway, concerns around that pedestrian experience at that intersection on the corridor. That was one question that we addressed, and the potential to maybe look at that as part of the 90% to 100% design. From 7th Ave, sort of questions around the wayfinding that we can expect for that intersection. And there's an opportunity to move people from businesses in Cap Hill to businesses on Broadway and sort of enhance safety. So we might connect that person with Sam Piper with the city. And then the potential crossing on Lincoln and 7th. The city is actually in design on this and is checking to see if we can have a crossing with a dedicated bike phase there. And then any connection to Cherry Creek Trail. was another theme. There's concerns around sort of access to the Cherry Creek Trail and then maybe safety in high density homeless population areas. And then sort of trying to activate that area to enhance safety. And then question was around a sightline analysis, looking at both directions of view for turning traffic across the bikeway. So maybe a concern that it could be a source of a driver not taking the time to look at the bikeway. And this is an issue definitely for non-signalized intersections, which is why at all of them we put a sight triangle to make sure that the people can see bikers coming. And then finally, concerns about people speeding down Spear to turn on the Broadway and maybe trying to enhance that connection to Denver Health, and maybe looking at phasing to restrict the right turn on reds to enhance the connection to Denver Health in the design. So I'll hand it off to you, Miles.
Thanks, Sam. And in Breakout Group B, there was a significant discussion around the tree grates and that what was going to be improved around areas of construction disturbance was going to benefit those trees, but it just highlighted the ongoing importance of coordination with the local maintenance districts to identify where some of those trees that are particularly large and healthy can be preserved during the construction process. Our corridor definitely spent a lot of conversation, a lot of time talking about the Rainbow Crosswalk at Irvington and Archer, and the importance of maintaining and preserving that. And it's, it is a cultural icon and a real true part of the fabric. So universal expression of importance on that. Also signage, throughout the corridor, but particularly in this segment where there's potential for conflicts between pedestrians crossing the bikeway to make sure that there's a lot of wayfinding signage there. Also stop signs and one-way signs for vehicles to make sure that safety and the proper movements and education is abundantly clear in the corridor as a whole, but particularly from 3rd to Bayard, excuse me, where there is a lot of pedestrian activity as well as bikes and people driving. The new loading zone configurations and the, again, education and enforcement that's going to be needed to maintain those was highlighted. And the importance of looking at bike and scooter and micro mobility parking as more of that. Those types of technologies are introduced into the corridor, making sure that folks, whether they're driving, whether they're riding their bike, whether they're walking, riding a scooter, have a place to park and get into the local businesses and their destination. And then some good comments on the public art, which I'm guessing is more of a universal comment from the other breakout groups as well. Like all art, it gets people talking, it elicits a lot of reactions. There was an interest in making sure there was an emphasis on branding specific to the corridor, branding specific to Broadway and Denver, and also concerns about the level of outreach and communication about selecting the artists and that more education to the community will be needed. And with that, I'm going to flip it to Kaylee for Breakout C.
Awesome. Thank you, Miles. So in Breakout C, we covered the southern segment of the project from Bayard to Center, which, as you all now know, creates a really important connection to the Broadway station. One theme that came up quite a bit were left turns along the corridor, specifically looking at busy intersections like Alameda and Broadway and the existing infrastructure in place. It sounds like drivers aren't really paying attention to the right turn arrows. And so the project team really highlighted how signal design has been improved with this project and is really going to be in alignment with drivers' vision to improve safety for pedestrians. We also talked about the shortened crossing distance for pedestrians, which includes the measures like the bus bulbs. Got some really positive reviews for that. With that, we kind of discussed signal times and how the city manages signal timing through the Traffic Management Center and regularly evaluating the signal timing in this corridor to make sure that bikes and pedestrians can cross safely. We did cover the existing infrastructure. So the intention is definitely to leave existing infrastructure in place or to do replace in, out, I think I'm saying it wrong, Brian said it really well, and remove and reset infrastructure. So the intention to leave the existing infrastructure in place, or to only remove those that will be impacted, like the tree grates, and then replace them with the new standards from 5 to 15 feet. We also talked about the enhanced bus stops in several locations along Broadway, where buses will now have a priority in the lane, particularly at Alameda and Virginia, through some really heavily coordinated efforts on the city's part with RTD on design, because it's currently pretty challenging for pedestrians to disembark from buses. So there was some really positive feedback from the groups on how these projects will be accommodating buses now. Pass it over to Miles or Sam.
Thanks, Kaylee. Well, and I know we're actually 3 minutes exactly over time here. And if there are other questions, I believe some, at least of the project team, will be able to stick around. But while we've got the full group, I want to really make sure we're clear on next steps, that this feedback that we got tonight was really helpful. And what we're going to be doing is hosting a joint meeting with 3 other projects happening in the corridor next week. You all should have heard about it. And as design work group members, we encourage you to make sure that your networks and your friends and neighbors and colleagues are aware of the meeting on February 24th. At that meeting, we're going to be giving a similar update with less detail about the Broadway Bikeway, also looking at the I-25 multimodal improvements project, Lincoln Transit Study, and the South Central Community Transportation Networks, which is going to be adding a lot of multimodal and bike connections to the Broadway Bikeway. If you have other questions and you would like to request a small group briefing to look at a specific intersection or discuss a specific issue, let us know. Email the project team. We'll show you that email address here in a second, and you should be able to contact us through all the information and email reminders you've been getting. So don't hesitate to request a small group briefing. And a quick recap on the schedule going forward. The final design should be completed sometime this summer. We're looking at that construction planning, as James outlined earlier, beginning later this year, and that should be about a 12 to 18 month process that would get us started with physical construction in 2022. And again, that's about a 12 to 8 month period there. So with that, you've got the email address. If you have questions, you can always email us at denvermovesbroadway@denvergov.org. And well, we've got the group here. We know we're past time, but if there are any other questions, we can open it up at this time. And I see if hands up. So Sam, I'll defer to you.
Yeah, so Charlie, do you want to ask a question?
No, I want to make a statement, actually. You know, there's a lot of different faces here than there were 5 years ago. But I have to give the entire project team the kudos with all the projects they've been involved in. This is one of the best run I've been involved with. I think your checkouts, your community involvement, and the big meetings that you held and had people drawing on maps, I think you conducted this project exceptionally well. And I know you guys hear a lot of complaints, so I just want to be one that says, congratulations. I think you did a great job, and please pass that on to the rest of the project team. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie.
Nice, thank you, Charlie. Benjamin, you have a question.
Yes. So one, District 3 would definitely like to help get this out in our e-news and social media platforms. I apologize, I haven't received any of the, I know of the meeting last week, but like any kind of flyers or whatnot, definitely if you can get that to me. And then secondly, a question that we have from our office is not just this project, but with bike lanes in the entire city. You know, I know the goal is to get our constituents, our community biking and walking and out there, but is the amount of parking that will be impacted, do we have a map showing the parking all over the city that's in that, how these projects have impacted that, and the specific amount of like spaces that are will be gone?
So I can jump in and handle that. So this project has not done a holistic study on that, but I do know our planning group is closely looking at that in conjunction with all the different projects in the area. So for example, on Broadway, we might lose a few spots for that existing parking spots for the new loading zones and things like that. But the Lincoln Transit Enhancements project that is going to be talked about in greater detail at the next meeting, that's actually adding parking. It's going to add off-peak parking in the current bus lanes along Lincoln. So while we might lose some here a block over, we're getting more, right? So that they are taking a look at that and trying to be sensitive to parking needs throughout the area.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And will there at some point be, something that you will be able to provide to us that shows that impact citywide or even just in your project?
I'd have to check into that. Like I said, that's a different group handles that, but we can certainly check into it and see what might be available.
Thank you very much.
And Benjamin and James, if I could just add to that too, looking at the parking and some of the trade-offs, one of the community priorities we heard was making sure that there also is adequate bike parking, and as micromobility and scooters are kind of growing in popularity, that we're thinking about that too. So some of those local business owners would be able to request additional bike parking on a side street using a vehicle parking spot for a bike corral, for example, or in certain instances above the curb on the sidewalk. So that's the constant balance. And so it's a great question. Thank you.
Oh, no, definitely. Me personally, I'm in a one car family, and I actually bought a scooter from Sportique Scooters. So I'm a scooter guy. So
right on. Thank you.
Lucia, your hand was up. Did you have a question?
Hi there. Yes. When we were discussing the northern part, and there's other places as well, there's all those curb cuts that we talked about. And I know that you're talking about combining some of them so there aren't so many. And I know that most of those places have access via the alley, like between 4th and 5th and between 5th and 6th, there is access from the alley. And I would see that as a public good to be able to make people go down the alley to access the businesses and the parking rather than cutting across. And that's just a comment, and maybe someone can address that at the future meeting. And the other thing is, we're talking about parking. I mean, I just don't understand why we subsidize private vehicles on public land with parking. Parking, I don't think it's a right. It's just something, the city is subsidizing our streets, subsidizing private vehicles with just allowing parking on the street, free parking or otherwise. It's just my comment.
Thank you, Lucia. That's a very good comment. And it kind of goes back to my comment about the trade-offs too. And really one of the goals of this project is to create, a connected transportation network and also a balanced transportation that provides people on bikes, people taking transit, people walking, and people driving with options.
Any other questions? If not, then real quick, I'd like to hand it to Jessica. I think she had something that she wanted to say that we missed during the introductions.
Oh, no worries. I was happy to just follow up via email, but I just wanted to give a quick plug. The Denver Streets Partnership has these cool postcards that you can order for free on our website and that support local businesses, because I think that's one thing we just really love about Broadway. And now that we have all this amazing access that I think really reflects how people travel along and to the corridor, we have these great postcards. They say, I walked or rolled to get here, and you can leave your own message for your favorite businesses on Broadway and Lincoln in the back. So I'm sure they'd love to see that support.
I use mine.
Yes, we saw that. Thank you so much.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay.
And Jessica, thank you for that. Can you give us one more plug on where to request some of those just to make sure everybody gets it?
Yeah, so that's on our website, denverstreetspartnership.org. I don't have a short link, so if you're there, just use the search box, type in postcard, should bring you straight to that page.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jessica. And I think we can all agree that the local businesses on Broadway are what makes Broadway Broadway. And our last event at Voodoo was, one of the most entertaining public engagement events I've had. So I cannot wait till we can do that again. And until then, let's support those local businesses.
Awesome. So I
Close
think
us out.
that, we can wrap it up. And I just wanted to thank you all so much for coming and then participating so actively and thoughtfully in the discussion, both the big group and listening actively, and then in the small groups of really asking really thought-provoking questions, and really appreciate everybody's input throughout this whole meeting. And please stay in touch. The email is right at the bottom of the screen there. Feel free to reach out if anything comes up in the meantime, and we hope to see you soon. Everyone has a wonderful night.
Thanks, everybody.
Awesome.
Thank you.
all.
Thank you.
Thanks, all.